Okay, if you're looking for a vampire story, Twilight did it better. Hello, wizards, witches, and everyone in between. My name is Emma, and welcome back to another wrap-up. So today is obviously my January wrap-up. I read 7 books in January, which wasn't as great as I thought I would do, but we're fine because I finished 3 books within the first 2 days of February. So the first book that I finished in January was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and as I've mentioned before, this has been on my book bucket list for a really long time, so I'm very happy that I finally got to it. I managed not to be spoiled by how this book ends, even though since reading this, I realize that it is spoiled in my favorite book of all time, and it is spoiled just in pop culture in general. So watch out for that. But I mean, you can still enjoy it even if you know how it ends, but I was just glad that I was oblivious. So, in my opinion, Anna Karenina in this book is not really the main character. I'd say she's more of a supporting character. But this book is about her cheating on her husband and kind of the repercussions of all of that. And I don't endorse cheating, but obviously this does take place back in the day during the Russian Revolution, so people didn't really marry for love back then. I don't know, in terms of classics, I can't really get mad at that. It's more of like contemporary, like YA contemporaries when there's cheating in the plot that like really irks me. So like I said, the decisions that she makes really ripple to affect so many people. I would argue that her husband and the person she cheated on her husband with are more main characters than she is, unfortunately, but I still liked reading about them. So I gave this book a 4 because while I really enjoyed the plot, I really enjoyed the writing, it did get it digressed a little too much. There was a large section on hunting, which I don't like hunting, don't really like reading about hunting, and then a large section on farming. So those got kind of dry for me. I kind of skimmed a little bit, but other than that, it was a good time. And the fact that this plot takes place within like the larger scope of the Russian Revolution, I think just adds another layer of complexity to the story, which I really enjoy because I do think if you strip all that away, the basic plot of this can be told in any setting, in any time period, but having that added layer, I think, makes it a lot more interesting. I thought that all of the characters were really well developed and complex, and there was definitely more humor in this than I thought there would be, so I can see why it's a classic. So next I read The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, volumes 4, 5, and 6, and I gave all of these 4 stars. It's just such a good time. I'm really sad there's not more volumes. I think there's 1 or 2 that I still haven't read, but then I'm all caught up. But it's fun. I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of the plot because of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. But I grew up watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and so I'm into anything about like teens and witches and that kind of thing. And this is obviously a lot darker. There's a lot of satanic stuff. There's a lot of violence and blood, and it gets real. So it's a good time. So next I read The Beautiful by Renee Audier, and I gave this book 3 stars because of the atmosphere and some of the writing and some of the characters. It was very average read for me, so 3 stars kind of means like I didn't dislike reading it, but I'm not interested enough to read like the second book in the series, so it's just kind of meh. So first of all, let me talk about what I did like about it. I liked the setting. It takes place in New Orleans. I can't remember when, but a long time ago. And a lot of it takes place at night, so that was all very atmospheric. And I really liked the main character's friend, Pippa, which I know some people think she's just very like vanilla and boring, but she reminded me of me and like the kind of friends that I have and the kind of friend that I want to be. I really liked Pippa, and I also liked Odette. And I can't really remember her role exactly, but she was kind of tied in with like the creepy underground vampire thing somehow, and I just pictured her like this really cool, put together but scary person. The other thing I liked is I liked the writing. I listened to this book And at points I found myself wishing that I had a physical copy to underline some stuff. Some passages in there I just thought were really pretty. But despite the writing, I felt like there was no substance to this book at all. I feel like barely anything happened. I wasn't really invested in any of our main characters, and the romance was kind of okay, but also very much lacking, and I just felt like Twilight did it better. If you're looking for a vampire book, Twilight, okay? I have never read a vampire book that had less vampires. This book barely has any vampire content in it, but calls itself a vampire book, and I'm just like, okay. So, I don't know. I have very conflicted feelings on it. I didn't dislike it, but it just really wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like this dark and gritty vampire book, and it was just a lot of fluff and no vampires. So next I read my first 5-star book of the year, which was The Diviners by Libba Bray. Now, I have been meaning to read this book since it came out, which was quite a long time ago, because I always thought I would like it, and guess what? I liked it. Funny how that works. So this book follows this girl called Evie O'Neill, and she kind of gets into some trouble in her hometown and gets shipped off to New York City to live with her uncle. And this takes place in the 1920s, which is such a fun time period for this to take place in. And her uncle runs this museum that kind of deals with the occult. That's plot-wise, that's really all I knew going into it, so I don't really want to say more than that. This book was very fast-paced with really, really well-developed characters. There are a lot more characters than I thought there would be in this, and we get to know all of them about equally, but not in like a boring info-dumpy way. So good. They were so well-developed, and like I said, setting it in the backdrop of the 1920s and Prohibition and everything, and the Follies and all that kind of stuff was so interesting. And Libba Bray did a great job of mixing like mystery and humor with just like straight up scary. Like parts of this book were so scary. I loved it. So Evie is the main character in this book, and I know a lot of people find her annoying. I personally liked her. I thought she was endearing and, you know, kind of not the smartest, but just really, I don't know, bubbly and fun. She reminds me a lot of Tiana's friend from Princess and the Frog. I think her name is Lottie. She reminds me, that's like who I was picturing when I was reading this book. I also really, really liked the character of Memphis. I thought he was very, very interesting. So I have been continuing on with the series in audiobook format, but you'll have to wait till my February wrap up. So Evie has this special power that makes her a diviner, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But she ends up kind of getting caught up in this murder investigation. So that's kind of like the basic plot of the story, but it kind of reminds me of like the Lunar Chronicles series in the sense that there's so many other characters' plot lines that are kind of going alongside the big arc one, and all of the characters are just so much fun, so highly recommend. Last but not least, I read Frankly in Love by David Yoon. So I gave Frankly in Love 2 stars. It was a time. It took me 3 weeks to read it. I read it on ebook, which is my first experience reading like a full-length book on ebook, and I don't know if that contributed to why it took me so long to read it. I don't know, but regardless, it just wasn't it. So this is a coming-of-age story where nothing happens. Why I gave it 2 stars instead of 1 star is the fact that this book does a great job of discussing like issues such as identity and culture and things like that. And I think these types of discussions are very, very important to have. But I think someone who can better identify with Frank might find this book more enjoyable. But nonetheless, I really like that aspect about it. In this book, Frank is dealing with feeling too American for the Koreans and too Korean for the Americans. And he has a lot of conflicts with his family and what his family wants him to do and what he wants to do with his life. And he doesn't understand the mindset that his parents have and their views of him dating people that are not Korean and all that kind of stuff. And like on paper, that sounds really great, but it dragged for so long. And this book wasn't even that long, but it felt so long. And my issue with it was the fact that there's all these issues brought up. Issues with his parents, issues with, you know, his identity and things like that. And I felt like all these conflicts were brought up, but then weren't really addressed and resolved in a satisfactory way. And so I feel like the arc of the plot really didn't go anywhere, and it was kind of like building, and then it just plateaued, and it never came to anything. And that really bugs me, because I feel like I was reading just about the same problems over and over and over again, but there wasn't any discussion about them, there wasn't any big resolution or an epiphany of, you know, this is how I want to live my life, or anything like that, and that just made it very dull for me. So I kind of wish I DNF'd it, but you know me, I am awful at DNFing things. I also really loved Frank's best friend, Q. I kind of wish that there would be a spin-off book about Q. Q was the best. I loved him so much, definitely my favorite character. And then at the end they kind of threw in this like info about Q, and then we didn't get to see it play out. And I think there's gonna be a second book. I don't think I'm gonna read it, but I do wish, it's just an odd thing to throw in at the end, even if there is gonna be a second book where it'll be explored more. It's just an odd thing to throw in at the end and be like, okay, bye. Those are my thoughts. Wouldn't really recommend it, but I don't know. So those are the books that I read in January. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know down below if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts on them were, and I will see you next time. Bye!